It's a warm July morning in Los Angeles, 1989. The sun has barely begun to burn through the haze that often sits low over West Hollywood. A young actress, just 21 years old, is waiting at home for a delivery. A film script is supposed to arrive, one that might change her career. She's nervous, hopeful, maybe even a little excited. She's already lived through the highs and lows of Hollywood. But as she opens the door that morning, she has no idea that on the other side isn't a courier or an opportunity. It's death. A man stands there. He's just 19, carrying the weight of an obsession that has consumed him for years. He raises a gun. A single shot echoes through the apartment complex. And with that, Rebecca Schaeffer's life, one filled with promise, light, and possibility, is cut short. This is the story of Rebecca Schaeffer. A young woman whose murder shocked Hollywood, changed the laws of the United States, and revealed the terrifying consequences of unchecked obsession. To understand the horror of that day, we need to step back and see who Rebecca was before she became the center of a tragedy. Rebecca Lucille Schaeffer was born on November 6, 1967, in Eugene, Oregon. She was the only child of Dana, a writer and instructor who taught at universities and community colleges, and Dr. Benson Schaeffer, a child psychologist. Rebecca's childhood was thoughtful and nurturing. She was raised in Portland, where she attended Lincoln High School. She was Jewish, and for a time, she dreamed of becoming a rabbi. Imagine that, a young girl, earnest and curious, standing in a synagogue, captivated not by the glamour of Hollywood but by the quiet pull of faith and tradition. But life has a way of shifting direction. During her junior year of high school, Rebecca began modeling. At first, it was innocent enough: department store catalogs, local commercials, a few background appearances. Yet even then, something about her shone. She had a presence that was natural, unforced. By the summer of 1984, at just 16, Rebecca was already catching the attention of professionals beyond Oregon. She spent a summer in New York City, working with elite model management. Her parents, cautious but supportive, gave her permission to stay in the city to pursue modeling. For Rebecca, it was the beginning of an adventure. New York was an unforgiving place, especially for someone so young. Rebecca balanced her modeling ambitions with education, attending the professional children's school. But reality set in quickly. At 5'7", she was considered too short for high-fashion modeling. The modeling world is brutal with its measurements, and Rebecca didn't quite fit the runway mold. Still, she pushed forward. She landed a short-term role on the daytime soap Guiding Light, and in late 1984, she took a bigger step, playing Annie Barnes on One Life to Live. It lasted 6 months, enough to show she had potential. But the struggles remained. She couldn't quite find steady modeling work. So, she took a bold move. She went to Japan in 1985, hoping the modeling industry there might be more open to her look. Yet again, height and weight were obstacles. By then, Rebecca had learned something important about herself: modeling wasn't where her real passion lay. Acting was calling her. When she returned to New York, she decided to pivot. This wasn't about rejection anymore, it was about following the thing that gave her joy. In 1986, Rebecca landed a small part in Woody Allen's film Radio Days. Most of her role ended up on the cutting room floor. But life often turns on little chances, and that small exposure helped her in ways she didn't yet see. She was still modeling when fate intervened. She appeared on the cover of 17 magazine, and that cover caught the attention of television producers casting for a new comedy on CBS, My Sister Sam. The show was built around Pam Dauber, already famous for Mork and Mindy. They needed someone fresh to play Sam's teenage sister, Patty Russell, who moves to San Francisco to live with her older sister after their parents' death. Rebecca auditioned, and she won the role. This was the moment she had dreamed of. Overnight, she wasn't just another struggling actress. She was starring in a network sitcom. Rebecca was just 19, living in Los Angeles, and suddenly the world felt wide open. She even lived with co-star Pam Dauber while working on the show, cementing a bond that was both professional and deeply personal. When My Sister Sam debuted, it was a hit. It ranked in the top 25 shows, beloved for its charm and humor. For Rebecca, it was validation, all the uncertainty, all the setbacks, they had led to this. But Hollywood is fickle. By its second season, ratings fell. The show was cancelled in 1988, midway through the season. Rebecca, however, didn't crumble. She was just getting started. She took supporting roles in films like Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, Voyage of Terror, The Achille Lauro Affair, The End of Innocence, and the TV movie Out of Time. She was becoming known as more than a sitcom star. She was a working actress, respected, versatile, and still only in her early 20s. She also gave her time to charity, becoming a spokesperson for Thursday's Child, a children's organization. Rebecca's life, in many ways, was a portrait of success. She wasn't at the peak yet, but she was climbing. She was full of light, potential, and purpose. But while Rebecca was chasing her dreams, someone else was watching her. Someone whose dreams had twisted into obsession. Enter Robert John Bardo. To understand how Rebecca's story ends, we need to dive into his. Robert was born in Tucson, Arizona, the youngest of 7 children. His upbringing was far from stable. He grew up in a household marked by turbulence, strictness, and emotional distance. He struggled in school, felt out of place, and was often described as troubled. From a young age, Robert gravitated toward fantasy, daydreaming, and, eventually, fixations. First, he became obsessed with Samantha Smith, the child peace activist who had famously visited the Soviet Union in the 1980s. Samantha died tragically in a plane crash in 1985, and Robert's grief over her death fed into a pattern, attaching himself to young women he didn't know, idolizing them, and believing they somehow belonged to him. By the mid-1980s, his fixation had shifted to Rebecca Schaeffer. It started with letters. Dozens of them. Rebecca, ever kind, responded to at least one. To Robert, that single reply wasn't just fan service, it was a bond. In his mind, it meant they shared something real. In 1987, Robert traveled to Los Angeles, determined to meet Rebecca. He showed up at the Warner Brothers lot where My Sister Sam was filmed. Security stopped him. He tried again a month later, this time carrying a knife. Again, security turned him away. He returned home to Tucson, but the obsession didn't fade, it only went underground. For a while, he shifted his attention to other celebrities, pop stars like Tiffany, Debbie Gibson, Madonna. But none held him the way Rebecca did. Then came 1989. Robert watched Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills. There was a scene where Rebecca appeared in bed with another actor. It was harmless. Just a role. But to Robert, it was betrayal. In his warped mind, Rebecca wasn't just an actress doing her job, she was his. And seeing her in that role was, to him, proof that she had become another Hollywood whore. His words. That moment cemented his deadly resolve. Robert's next steps showed chilling calculation. He had read about another celebrity obsession, Arthur Richard Jackson, who had stalked and stabbed actress Teresa Saldana in 1982. Robert learned Jackson had used a private investigator to find Saldana's home address. Inspired by that, Robert did the same. He went to a private detective agency in Tucson, paying $250. They didn't hesitate. Using California's Department of Motor Vehicles records, they obtained Rebecca's address and handed it over. No questions asked. Armed with her location, Robert prepared. With the help of his brother, He got his hands on a Ruger GP 100.357 revolver. Then, in July 1989, he traveled to Los Angeles. He roamed the neighborhood, asking strangers if Rebecca really lived where the detective said she did. Once he was certain, he was ready. He rang her doorbell. It was just after 10 a.m. in West Hollywood. Rebecca was at home, waiting for a script for The Godfather Part 3. She had been considered for a role, and though she would later lose it to Winona Ryder, this was a big opportunity. The audition meant everything. So when the doorbell rang, she thought nothing of answering. Standing there was Robert John Bardo. In his hand, he carried a letter and an autograph Rebecca had once sent him. The conversation was brief. Rebecca was polite, but firm. She asked him not to come back to her home. Then she closed the door. Robert walked away. He went to a nearby diner, sat down, and ordered breakfast. But the obsession wasn't done. About an hour later, he returned. This time, when Rebecca answered the door, Robert said her face looked cold, distant. In reality, she was likely wary, unsettled, maybe even fearful. Robert pulled out the revolver. Point blank, he shot her once in the chest. Rebecca fell, gasping, repeating, "Why? Why?" as blood poured from her. Neighbors rushed to help. Paramedics arrived and transported her to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Despite desperate efforts, Rebecca Schaeffer was pronounced dead within 30 minutes. She was just 21 years old. The murder of Rebecca Schaeffer was not just another crime in Los Angeles. It was a chilling event that rattled the entire entertainment industry. Hollywood was used to scandal, tragedy, even violence. But this felt different. Here was a young woman on the verge of breaking through, killed not by some random accident or Hollywood excess, but by a fan, a stranger, who had turned obsession into violence. The press swarmed her West Hollywood apartment building. Neighbors were interviewed. Friends and co-stars were blindsided. Pam Dauber, who had lived with Rebecca and remained close, was devastated. For many actors and actresses, the crime was terrifyingly close to home. If it could happen to Rebecca, it could happen to any of them. But in those first hours, beyond the headlines and grief, law enforcement needed answers. Who had killed Rebecca Schaeffer, and why? The Los Angeles Police Department moved quickly. Witnesses from the apartment building reported seeing a man at Rebecca's door that morning. Some recalled a heated but brief exchange. Others saw him return after leaving once. The key was that they remembered his face. He hadn't tried to hide. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood and pieced together details. Someone recalled the stranger asking around about Rebecca's apartment days earlier. Another remembered the man loitering outside. The description painted a picture of someone deliberate, not opportunistic. Meanwhile, forensic teams scoured the scene. They found the single spent shell casing, the trajectory of the bullet, and fingerprints around the doorway. But even before the evidence could fully build, the suspect was already unraveling elsewhere. After pulling the trigger, Robert Bardo didn't linger. He fled the scene, shaken but not repentant. He drifted through Los Angeles for hours, carrying the knowledge of what he'd done but not attempting to hide it. Eventually, he boarded a bus back to Tucson, Arizona. By the next morning, motorists along Interstate 10 saw a man behaving erratically. Running in and out of traffic, shouting incoherently, at times even throwing himself toward cars as though daring them to hit him. Concerned drivers called authorities. Tucson police responded. The man they found was 19-year-old Robert John Bardo. Bardo didn't resist arrest. He didn't even deny what he'd done. Almost immediately, he confessed to the murder of Rebecca Schaeffer. It wasn't the cold, silent confession of a hardened criminal. It was the erratic, almost self-righteous justification of someone whose obsession had crossed into delusion. To him, Rebecca wasn't a stranger. She was someone he believed he had known, someone he had constructed an entire fantasy relationship around. And when she didn't live up to the role he had written for her in his mind, he decided she had to die. Law enforcement now had their man, and his confession. But the work wasn't over. They had to piece together not just how, but why, and ensure a conviction that would keep him from ever hurting anyone again. The case was assigned to prosecutor Marcia Clark, a name that years later would become famous as the lead prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson trial. At this point in 1989, she was a skilled, determined attorney with a reputation for being tough and meticulous. The trial wasn't about who Bardo had confessed. It was about intent. Was this first-degree murder? Or would the defense try to paint it as a crime of passion, the act of a disturbed young man who lost control? The evidence pointed clearly toward premeditation. Bardo had stalked Rebecca for years. He had tried to approach her at Warner Brothers years earlier, once carrying a knife. He had studied the attack on Teresa Saldana and copied the method of obtaining a celebrity's home address. He had paid a private investigator $250 to get Rebecca's location from DMV records. He had secured a firearm with help from his brother. He had traveled to Los Angeles with the sole purpose of finding Rebecca. Every step showed calculation. The defense leaned on Bardo's mental instability. They portrayed him as emotionally disturbed, a young man unable to separate fantasy from reality. They argued that he wasn't capable of true premeditation because he was living in a delusional world. But the judge, Judge Dino Fulgoni, saw it differently. In a bench trial, without a jury, he weighed the evidence and ruled decisively, this was first-degree murder. In 1991, Robert John Bardo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was sent to the Avenal State Prison in California, where he remains to this day. Rebecca's murder was more than a tragedy. It was a wake-up call. The fact that Bardo had obtained her address through a private investigator who accessed DMV records stunned the public. It revealed how vulnerable anyone, not just celebrities, could be to stalkers. At the time, there were no anti-stalking laws in the United States. There were no restrictions on how easily personal information could be obtained. Rebecca's case exposed the cracks in the system. In 1990, California passed the nation's first anti-stalking law, Penal Code 646.9. It made stalking, the repeated following and harassing of another person, a criminal offense. Other states soon followed. In 1994, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act was enacted, making it illegal for the DMV to release private addresses to the public. These changes were directly tied to Rebecca's death. Her story became the catalyst for protections that now safeguard millions. Rebecca's death devastated her friends, family, and colleagues. Pam Dauber and the cast of My Sister Sam reunited to film a public service announcement for the Center to Prevent Handgun Violence, speaking out against the very weapon that had taken their friend. Her parents, Dana and Dr. Benson Schaeffer, were left to mourn their only child, a loss beyond words. Director Brad Silberling, Rebecca's boyfriend at the time, was deeply affected. Years later, he created the 2002 film Moonlight Mile, inspired by his grief. The movie tells the story of a young man navigating life after his fiancée is murdered. While fictionalized, it was rooted in the pain he experienced after losing Rebecca. For Hollywood, the lesson was sobering. Stars began demanding better security, more privacy protections, and stronger boundaries between themselves and fans. But nothing could undo what had already been done. A young woman full of life, kindness, and potential was gone, because of obsession. What makes someone like Robert Bardo? How does admiration turn into fixation, and fixation into violence? Psychologists have studied cases like his for decades. Obsessive fans often fall into a category known as erotomania, a delusional belief that someone, often a celebrity, is secretly in love with them. Bardo's background played a role. His troubled childhood, feelings of alienation, and emotional instability set the stage. When he fixated on Rebecca, she became a blank canvas for all his unmet needs. Her single fan response to him, one letter among many, became, in his mind, confirmation of a bond. When he saw her play roles that contradicted his fantasy image of her, it felt like betrayal. In his distorted logic, punishing her was the only way to resolve the dissonance between fantasy and reality. It's chilling, because it reveals how fragile the line is between admiration and obsession, between fandom and stalking. And how dangerous it becomes when access to a victim is as simple as paying a small fee for their home address. Rebecca Schaeffer's story doesn't end with her death. Her life, though tragically short, inspired change. Her death saved lives by forcing lawmakers to confront stalking and privacy issues that had long been ignored. Every anti-stalking law in the United States traces back, in part, to Rebecca. Every time personal data is protected from being casually handed over, her story echoes. She is remembered not only as an actress, but as a symbol, a reminder of how vulnerable people can be, and how crucial it is to guard against obsession. In Portland, Oregon, she rests at Ahavai Shalom Cemetery. Friends, fans, and family still visit, leaving flowers and tokens of remembrance. Rebecca's murder was shocking, but not unique in its pattern. The phenomenon of celebrity stalking has claimed and threatened many lives.